Jim Rickards. The world is unprepared for the next financial crisis. The future is gold. Famous writer, lawyer, economist, and financial expert Jim Rickards predicts that the US dollar will drop after a new financial crisis that may be closer to reality than people think. Russia and China have purchased unprecedented levels of gold in the past decade, while the expert noted that central banks are still not recovering from the previous crisis. Mr. Rickards said the global economy was still fluctuating in the 2008 global financial crisis. Interest rates remained low, and central banks were unable to raise their books to previous levels. He added that the world is completely unprepared for the next crisis, which will be much worse than the previous two. Who's going to bail out the central banks? With another financial crisis imminent, Mr. Rickards posed the question, who is going to bail out the central banks? Your only alternatives are turned to the International Monetary Fund to basically bail out the world, although that is a slow and difficult process. If the IMF did rescue the central banks, the process could take 6 months to a year. Additionally, Mr. Rickards said there were numerous other challenges to IMF provided relief. For an IMF bailout to occur, it will require 85% approval from all member countries. If you have a 15% plus 1% blocking power vote, then it doesn't happen. He added that the US was the only country in the world with a 16% voting power. However, he pointed out a small coalition such as BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, nations, and Venezuela could collectively block any relief action or put conditions on it. And that condition may well be that the US dollar is no longer the global reserve currency. Mr. Rickards said some people expect the US Federal Reserve to jump to the rescue again in the next financial crisis. What are they going to do if a crisis hit tomorrow? Go to $5 trillion US dollar, $6 trillion US dollar? Mr. Rickards said the other alternative was to shut down the banks, and that's what I expect will happen. They will close exchanges, close banks, close ATMs, freeze accounts. When people say that will never happen, Mr. Rickards explained it has happened many times before, including Cyprus, Greece, and Argentina. He added it also happened in the US in 1933, when US President Franklin D. Roosevelt ordered every bank to close. The bank shutdown lasted 8 days, but Mr. Rickards said no one knew how long the closure would be, and it will easily have been a month to 2 months. He pointed out another financial shutdowns occurred in the US in 1914, when the World War I broke out. The New York Stock Exchange was closed for 5 months, from July 1914 to December 1914. What does the future look like in the next crisis? Mr. Rickards was quick to point out he does not foresee a dystopian future or an end of the world scenario. However, he said he did expect the crisis will begin with enormous social unrest. Elaborating on this statement, Mr. Rickards noted the veneer of civilization is paper thin. We saw this in August 2005 with Hurricane Katrina in the US, where the city of New Orleans was cut off and order broke down within days. By the second day, people were becoming desperate for food and water. By the third day, violence had broken out. You have vigilantes, looters, and the National Guard moving in. Civilized behavior only lasts about 3 days in the absence of reliable water, food, electricity, and all the things we take for granted. In a situation where banks are closed and people can't access their money, Mr. Rickards said social disorder will break out quite quickly. This will be followed by a breakdown of internal systems. This is how complex civilizations collapse. It isn't a barbarian's invasion, but an internal collapse because of too much bureaucracy, too much taxation and complexity. He said the social disorder will be most acute in major metropolitan areas. To survive this new system, Mr. Rickards anticipates communities will shift to a semi-barter system where skills are traded and silver, or gold if you have it, can be used to buy food and other essentials. Fall of the US dollar and rise of gold. As the crisis unfolds, the US dollar is expected to become worthless, with gold the primary valuable commodity. Even then, Mr. Rickards said, in his opinion, it was safer to own mostly physical bullion rather than gold futures, options, unallocated gold contracts, and ETFs, etc. He pointed out there is not enough physical gold in warehouses to meet these paper claims. Slightly different was owning shares in gold mining stocks. There is gold there, but it does not belong to you. It belongs to the miner. When looking at investing in gold mining companies and explorers, Mr. Rickards said, just as important as the geology, location, costs, grade, and processing methods is the management team. Some gold companies have great management. They know exactly what they are doing, and they have a track record of controlling costs, etc. Other gold companies, some of them are frauds. Some may not be frauds, but have poor management. So obviously you don't want to be involved in those. Access of gold. In anticipation of such a scenario, many countries have been scoping up gold at rapid rates, with central banks buying record amounts of the precious metal in the first half of 2019 alone. Since 2009, Russia has tripled its gold reserves from about 600 tons to almost 2,300 tons. China has more than tripled its gold reserves, also from 600 tons to 2,000 tons. They probably have more off the books. We don't know how much, but could just say they have tripled it and you're on the safe ground. Iran has acquired well over 100 tons. They are not transparent. We don't know the exact amount, but that's a good estimate. Collectively, central banks have been hoarding gold since 2010, with buy-ups increasing even more in recent years and even months. Other countries making big gold purchases include Poland, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Vietnam, Mexico, and the Philippines. Mr. Rickards has called this movement the new axis of gold. Looking at what most of these countries have in common is they are also targets of US sanctions. Russia has been sanctioned for its operations in Ukraine and Crimea. China has been sanctioned for theft of intellectual property, limits on foreign investment, and unfair trade practices, etc. North Korea has been sanctioned for weapons, and Iran has been sanctioned for its nuclear enrichment program, etc. According to Mr. Rickards, the US financial war on these countries effectively suffocates their economies. Mr. Rickards said this form of warfare works, but the question is how long a country is going to sit there and take it. And the answer is not much longer. He said China and Russia could feasibly implement a permissioned digital currency system that is backed by gold and based on blockchain technology. Being a permissioned system, countries would need approval to join. If the permissions committee does not let you in, then you're on the sidewalk. He said digital coin tokens would be used to keep track of transactions and the balance settled with physical gold once or twice a year. What's missing from that? The US dollar. There is no dollar at all. And if you think this is a fictitious scenario, think again. Mr. Rickards pointed out it was already underway. The gold is being acquired. This is a foundational step. The technology is out there. It is not that difficult to do. This could come quite quickly and unexpectedly. Most of the idea, comment, information, and criticism containing in these videos have been created by Daily News Report. Before making any important investment decision, use the information contained in these videos as a starting point for conducting your own research. If you make any investment or legal decision, it is advised to consult an expert before making this decision.